Howdy, howdy, and welcome back to another episode of Northwest Craftsman. Today, I just upgraded my shop to get an air compressor, and this is the first air compressor that I've ever had to purchase, and so I wanted to share with you guys some of the tips that I learned and some of the things that I needed to pay attention to when I was getting my air compressor so that you guys can size and purchase the correct air compressor for yourselves. All right, let's go ahead and get started. So there's really 3 or 4 considerations that you need to take when purchasing your air compressor. One is going to be, what is your CFM or cubic feet per minute at both 90 psi and 40 psi? What is the maximum pressure that the air compressor can supply? What is the overall tank size, as in how many gallons? Is it a 1 gallon, like a little tiny pancake, or is it all the way up to an 80 gallons standalone tank? And then what type of compressor is it using? Is it using an oiled or an oilless? Because both of those have different pros and cons associated with them. And then also, what are the power requirements for the compressor? Is it 240 or is it 120? Because that will mean you need to either upgrade your shop or make sure that you have the right shop hookup. So when it comes to what your volumetric flow rate capable of being supplied by your compressor is, that's going to be rated in CFM or cubic feet per minute for both 40 psi and 90 psi. Now, why this is important is because depending on the tools that you are planning to run in your shop, for me, it's mostly going to be this little tiny baby HVLP sprayer so that I can finish my projects a little bit easier. You need to look at what CFM requirements those have at which pressure, whether it's 40 or 90 psi, and then you need to make sure that your air compressor has a compressor with a large enough capacity to supply that air. And essentially, if you're not familiar with what cubic feet per minute and what exactly I'm talking about, that's basically saying how much air can the compressor supply at any one time. So it's not necessarily how big the tank is, it's saying when it's trying to cycle it live, how much air can the compressor supply on the go? So it's not about how big it is, it's just about how quickly can it regenerate. And so in this case, I needed at least 6 CFM, which for smaller compressors is actually kind of a big deal. You'll see a lot around the 3 to 4 CFM range, but once you start getting into the 5 and 6 CFM range, you start looking into other types of compressors or larger compressors. In the case of my compressor here, you can see that it's a 6.9 CFM at 40 psi and 5.5 CFM at 90 psi, which means this is going to be plenty of capacity for the little sprayer that I'm going to be primarily using. So make sure to check the tools that you're using and make sure that when you're sizing it out, you have enough flow rate for the tools you're trying to operate. All right, so the second thing you want to look for is, what is the maximum pressure that your tank can allow or that your compressor can allow? And really, this is important for your tools as well, or what you want to be filling up. And in my case, my road bike tires, because I used to race in triathlons and I still ride my bike periodically, those go up to about 110 psi. So I wanted to make sure that I had at least 110 psi that I could supply at any given time. So in my case, I've got 125 max psi. Make sure that you size yours properly for whatever the maximum pressure you're going to be supplying is. And again, all of this comes back to what tools are you planning to use. So kind of look across the tools, look at the maximum pressures required. Not the maximum pressures allowed, but the maximum pressures required for your different tasks. I found in my research that this was not one of the more stringent requirements, not even close to the CFM requirement. CFMs were the ones that drove my decision. So the third thing you want to look for is, what tank size do you have on the actual compressor itself? So most air compressors, or all air compressors, are actually made out of 2 separate devices. One is the compressor and one is the tank, and you can mix and match those as much as you want, and you'll see all sorts of combinations on the market with a little tiny motor on top and a giant tank, or a giant motor or a giant compressor on a little tiny tank. You see those a lot for job sites so that you've got it a little bit more mobile, or you'll see big on big, small on small, etc. I mean, you can literally get any combination that's in there. But your tank size is going to be talking about what kind of capacity you have to continue going. So if I'm using my paint sprayer and I've got a very large tank, it's going to be a while before I actually have to activate the compressor to get it coming back up. And if I've got more CFMs than are required by my device, it'll it will work faster than I'm consuming it, fill the tank back up. And so you essentially get a lower duty cycle on the compressor itself. So having a large tank, if you're planning on doing big projects, is a good idea, because it means you're going to have a lot larger reservoir of air that you can use before you actually need to activate your compressor. However, if you're only going to be filling up tires or doing small little touch-up work, you probably don't need anything very big, because you're not going to be using a large volume of air at a time. So again, in my case, I got a 22-gallon tank, which kind of sits right in the middle. Some of the common ones that you're going to see are little 1-gallon pancake tanks. Those are the ones that kind of shape like this on either side. You're also going to see 5-gallon tank, 8-gallon tanks, and a bunch of different sizes all the way up. And then the big ones are usually 60-gallon or 80-gallon tanks, and those are not portable like you see this one. This one can be wheeled around. Those larger ones are not portable. They're just going to be set up in the shop, and they're meant to be a permanent fixture unless you're going to move them and hoist them into the back and trucks and stuff. But 60 to 80 gallons provides you with a lot of capacity to do a lot of different work. So 22 gallons seems like it should be enough for me, but we will see as I start using it if I need more capacity than that. So the last thing that you want to take into consideration is the type of compressor that you're using. You have oilless and you have oiled. Now the primary differences between those two is that on the oiled, you're going to have more of a piston compression system. And to my understanding, the oil-free or the maintenance-free, you'll also hear them as maintenance-free sometimes. Those guys are using a turbine. The primary differences you're going to see on those are twofold. One, the oil-free are generally a lot louder. The maintenance-free ones are a lot louder because of the turbine. And then they also usually have lower CFM ratings, whereas on the oiled systems, they're usually much quieter in operation when the motor actually has to turn on. The ones that I've seen kind of sound a little bit like chitty chitty bang bang when it's just idling forward, where it's just like, so don't quote me on that, but that's about what they sound like. And then you also get much higher CFM ratings out of it. And if you have an operation that requires higher CFM ratings, you may look at that, but you're also going to trade cost. Oiled are usually more expensive and usually sit on larger tanks, and you're going to see them in more industrial settings. So you kind of have to weigh the pros and cons. In my case, I was able to get a 5 horsepower oilless compressor, and so I was able to get all of my CFM ratings needed in a oilless or a maintenance free. So it is a little bit louder than I would like it to be, but at the same time, that's not a killer in my opinion. Now, inside of the actual compressor type, one of the other considerations you're going to need to take is the power requirement. So you're going to need to know, do you need 120 or 240? And generally speaking, it is not even really a hard and fast rule, but on most of the oiled compressors that I was seeing, it is a 240 volt requirement. If you're doing a maintenance free, most of them are a 120 volt requirement. So 120 is going to be your kind of standard household plug. 240, you're going to need to do some special wiring or make sure that you've got the correct wiring in your shop. Also check your amperage rating. So this one is rated at, I think it's 14 amps in operation, which is just under my breaker. So if I was running this full time, I wouldn't be able to do this on the fuses. But it should be able to fit on the circuit so long as I don't have other things going at the same time. But you're going to want to make sure that you check to make sure that you've got the right current requirements, the right voltage requirements, or the right current and voltage supply to your shop to power whichever compressor you're looking for. And then one last piece of advice. My brother had given this to me when I started looking because he's much more well-versed in the shop, and he does more mechanic automotive work, and so he's been looking at air compressors for a lot longer than I have. One of the pieces of advice that he gave is to look for compressors on Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, because you can usually find a far better deal on them in those locations, because there's guys or gals that are looking to move. They can't take their giant stationary compressor with them. In fact, I just missed an opportunity to get a 7 horsepower 80-gallon tank in my town, and that thing literally got snatched up in about an hour, and it was only like $225. And so, assuming there was nothing else wrong with it, that would have supplied all the air I would have needed for, I mean, ideally my lifetime, but I don't know. I guess we'll see how long it would last. But in this case, I just got this little tiny 5 horsepower. I also got it on Facebook Marketplace. But you can find a lot of really good deals on those online sites rather than having to buy it brand new when you're paying $800 to get some of these nicer air compressors that have the CFM requirements and all the other requirements you have. You can find a lot of really good ones because realistically, they're pretty simple machines, especially the oiled ones. They're really simple. They're really hard to break unless you drop them or crack something. So go ahead and search in those locations if you're looking for something. Also, as a note, most air compressors have this tag on the side that gives you all of the specific stats, whether it's horsepower, the CFM rating at different PSIs, the overall maximum PSI that you can get, and the size of the tank. I saw that this was a very common format across the air compressors that I was looking for. So if you can find this tag or ask somebody to take a picture of this tag, it gives you all of the information in one location. Well, guys, thanks for joining me today. Those were some of the lessons that I learned and some of the information that I gathered when I was searching for an air compressor. I know that this was mostly a talking episode and not more of a showing episode, but this was the type of information that I really wish I would have had to jumpstart my search at the beginning when I was trying to get my air compressor. So I hope that at least for one of you, or at least for a few of you, it has shortened your journey in understanding what are the different requirements about air compressors and what are the things that I need to consider when purchasing an air compressor. So if you have any further questions, things that I did not answer, go ahead and leave it in the comment section down below and I'll go ahead and get to those. And if you like the kind of content we're producing here at Northwest Craftsman, we really appreciate a thumbs up on the video and a subscribe to the channel. We are getting so close to 1,000 subscribers. I mean, it literally should be within a matter of weeks that we're getting it. And I'm thinking about doing a giveaway for when we get to 1,000 subscribers. There should be a video posted right about at the same time, and we should be doing a giveaway. So go ahead and stay tuned for that one, and look forward to potentially getting something when we hit that point. All right, thank you guys. I hope you have a great one. I will talk to you later. Bye.